The event brought together delegates from over 100 countries, including journalists, academics, civil society groups championing media freedoms, as well as government representatives. Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland provided frightening statistics to underscore the need for the conference.
Today, journalism is difficult and dangerous work. UNESCO reports that last year alone, 99 members of the media were killed around the world. And by the end of last year, Reporters Without Frontiers says 348 journalists were in prison. In fact, the 4 deadliest recorded years for journalists have occurred within the past decade.
Conference co-host, the UK's Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt, highlighted why journalists, though may make mistakes, are so important in any society.
The strongest safeguard against the dark side of power is accountability and scrutiny. And few institutions fulfill that role more effectively than a free media. Real accountability comes from the risk of exposure by a media that cannot be controlled or suborned. And the evidence for this is very clear. Of the 10 cleanest countries in the world, as ranked by Transparency International, 7 are also in the top 10 of the World Press Freedom Index. Meanwhile, of the 10 most corrupt countries, 4 are in the bottom 10 for media freedom. Now, powerful people value their reputations, so the sunlight of transparency is the greatest deterrent to wrongdoing.
He advised his colleague politicians around the world they are better off with a media that feels free to criticize governments.
For those of us who are sometimes on the receiving end of criticism, we should also reflect on the wisdom of Nelson Mandela, when he said, "The media are a mirror through which we see ourselves and others perceive us, warts, blemishes and all. Such criticism can only help us to grow by calling attention to those of our actions and omissions which do not measure up to our people's expectations."
The UK Special Envoy on Press Freedom, Amal Clooney, made the point that the defense of media freedom encompasses the regulatory framework governing the operations of media houses.
And the indictment against WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange has alarmed journalists at newspapers around the world, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and the Guardian, because, as the editor of the Washington Post has put it, it, quote, criminalizes common practices in journalism that have long served the public interest. With many governments also insulting and threatening journalists and seeking to throttle media organizations through strict controls on ownership, licensing, and online activity, we have reached the point where there are few places in the world where journalists are not surveilled, harassed, disenfranchised, or subject to self-censorship.
Information Minister Kojo Oppong-Nkrumah, who was at the head of the Ghana delegation, conceded government's record on press freedom has suffered a dent in recent years.
Unfortunately, as the world goes through a period of attacks on media, Ghana in recent years has also experienced its share, despite our good track record. The worst being the cold-blooded murder of Ahmed Swale, believed to be connected with his work as an associate of the media organization Tiger Eye PI. Regrettably, our investigative agencies have not made much headway in arresting and punishing perpetrators of this and other acts of intimidation. Indeed, it appears we took our media excellence and public tolerance for granted. But now, we have had to face up to the challenging and changing realities and do more. Abuse and attack on journalists cannot and must not be accepted. It must not only be condemned, but must be fought head-on.
The conference established a multi-million-dollar fund for the safety of journalists, a number of initiatives for the defense and protection of media freedom, including an international task force to help governments deliver on their commitment made at the conference, were also announced. So the UK